What really happened behind the scenes of Gilligan's Island? At 91, Tina Louise is finally breaking her silence, and what she reveals will change the way you see the show forever. From secret feuds to shocking paychecks and the real reason she almost walked off set, this isn't the tropical paradise fans imagined. You think you know Ginger, but Tina's truth goes deeper. Stay with me, because what she shares after all these years will leave you stunned. She vanished without a farewell. No closing bow, no final laugh, not even a nod of recognition after the curtains fell. One day she was the darling of late-night television, basking in Johnny Carson's glow, and the next, she was wiped from the screen like a forgotten cue card. Not a cameo, not a tribute, nothing. It was as if she had never existed. The cameras never rolled back in her direction, and Hollywood didn't flinch. The silence was deliberate and deafening. Johnny Carson didn't just freeze her out, he erased her. And she wasn't the only one to feel that chill. When Johnny turned away, so did everyone else. A glance could open doors in this town, but a frown could slam them shut forever. Back then, there was a single spotlight in late-night TV that determined your fate. If you wanted to make it in Hollywood, getting 5 minutes on Carson's couch could change your life. But what most people didn't see was the invisible rule book. The smiles, the laughs, the applause. None of it came without strings. Everyone played along because they knew the stakes. And if you ever dared to break those unspoken rules, you weren't just kicked off the stage. You were locked out of the game. It wasn't about talent or popularity. Some of the brightest stars, loved by millions, found themselves suddenly unwelcome. The audience at home had no idea. How could they? The show was always polished, the jokes always sharp. But just beneath that charm was a quiet power, one that could lift or destroy with a single gesture. And the scariest part, there was no public fallout, no fiery drama, just a slow, strategic silence. One week you were a regular. The next, your name stopped getting mentioned, and your chair stayed empty. There was no dramatic music cue to signal the fall. It happened in whispers. A joke that went a beat too long. A conversation that didn't let Johnny have the last word. Or worse, an act of disloyalty behind the scenes that felt like betrayal. It didn't take much. Sometimes it was about business. Sometimes it was personal. But when Carson was done with you, the industry followed suit like clockwork. A few questioned it, but most didn't dare. The impact was brutal. Missing one invitation wasn't just a missed opportunity. It was a career killer. Imagine working your whole life for that one shot, only to find the door locked without explanation. It was like disappearing without ever leaving town. And to truly grasp why that silence held so much weight, you have to understand just how enormous The Tonight Show really was during Carson's reign. If you lived through it, you know. It wasn't just a talk show, it was the show. Being featured on Carson was like receiving a Hollywood baptism. New comedians, rising actors, even established stars lined up for that coveted slot. The stage, the desk, the curtain, it all had a magic to it. Carson's grin had its own gravitational pull. And when he waved you over to the guest chair after your set, that wasn't just an invitation. It was a coronation. That small wave? That was everything. Careers were made in that moment. Jerry Seinfeld, David Letterman, they've all spoken about what it meant. It was the difference between hustling for gigs and suddenly being the name everyone wanted. People planned their evenings around the show. There were no reruns at your fingertips, no clips to scroll through later. You either watched Johnny live, or you missed history. The structure he built, monologues, sketches, guests, music, became the mold for every talk show that followed. From Fallon to Colbert, you can still trace the blueprint back to Carson's stage. But here's the truth most people don't talk about. Behind that effortless flow was a man with immense control. Control over who got seen. control over who got forgotten. And when that control turned sharp, it cut deep. If Johnny soured on you, the fallout wasn't temporary. It was permanent. You weren't just pulled from a lineup. You were exiled from the narrative. Even whispers of Carson's disapproval sent ripples through booking offices and studio meetings. He didn't need to rant or rage. His silence said more than words ever could. And everyone in the business knew what it meant. Rich Little knew. The master impressionist who once had the audience roaring eventually got the cold shoulder. They said his material got stale, but insiders knew it wasn't about the jokes. He'd poked fun at Johnny one too many times. That was all it took. Dana Carvey learned the same lesson. His Carson impression while promoting Wayne's World was spot on. Too spot on. Carson didn't laugh. He didn't argue either. He just made sure Carvey didn't come back. The danger was never in the punchline. It was in not knowing when you crossed the line, until it was already too late. And if there was ever a story that captured the heartbreak of that fallout, it was Joan Rivers. She wasn't just another guest. She was Carson's discovery, his chosen one. Back when women in comedy were dismissed at 31 as too old, Joan was relentless. Johnny saw her spark, gave her the platform, and catapulted her into the spotlight. More than that, he made her his permanent guest host, his right hand, his late-night heir. They had chemistry, camaraderie, and trust. At least, that's how it seemed. Until 1986. That's when Fox offered Rivers her own late-night show. A groundbreaking moment. A brand new network. A historic opportunity to become the first woman to host a major show. Joan hesitated. She didn't want to hurt Johnny. But then she discovered something devastating. NBC had no plans to offer her Carson's seat when he stepped down. They weren't even considering her. It was a revelation that cut deep. So she made her decision. But she didn't tell Johnny first. And that one choice changed everything. What started as a whisper through Hollywood's tightly wound grapevine spiraled into an avalanche Joan Rivers never saw coming. Johnny Carson, her mentor, her friend, the man who once introduced her as the future of comedy, found out not from her lips, but through industry chatter that she was leaving The Tonight Show to host her own late-night program on Fox. And that betrayal? It didn't ignite rage. It birthed something colder. An unforgiving silence. Carson didn't scream, didn't fight. He simply hung up the phone the moment she called, and from that second on, Joan Rivers ceased to exist in his universe. He didn't just stop talking to her. He iced her out completely. Letters went unanswered, calls unreturned. And it wasn't just a matter of personal estrangement. This was Hollywood exile. Not only was Joan blacklisted from The Tonight Show, but anyone who dared to grace her Fox stage was automatically scratched from Johnny's couch. For a world that revolved around who you knew and where you were seen, that was career poison. One insider later revealed, he didn't see it as competition, he saw it as betrayal. In Carson's eyes, loyalty was sacred. Break it, and you were history. She was like family to him, a former show staffer said, and that made it worse. Because when the people you love let you down, the hurt runs deeper. Years later, Joan's voice would still quiver whenever she spoke his name. Despite the ice between them, she never stopped trying. Every year she sent him a letter, hoping one day he might break the silence. But the silence never broke. Not once. And in a move so quietly brutal it could only be orchestrated by someone nursing a personal wound, Carson erased her from his show's legacy. Archival clips? Disappeared. Mentions? Scrubbed. For decades, it was as if Joan had never been a part of the most iconic late-night show in television history. To viewers, she became invisible. In interviews, she speculated on the reasons behind his silence. "I think he thought I was his," she once said, barely masking the heartbreak. "Like I belonged to him because I was a woman. And I left." And when Carson passed away in 2005, Her grief wasn't for the world's loss of a legend. It was for the man who first believed in her. The man who wouldn't let her explain. "I would have done anything to fix it," she once said softly. "I just wanted to talk, but he wouldn't even look at me." But Joan wasn't the only one to feel Carson's wrath. In late night, getting banned didn't always come from grand offenses. Sometimes all it took was a joke that didn't land, or a moment that spun out of control. Comedian Bobcat Goldthwait learned that the hard way. His unpredictable, manic energy once made him a standout, until it became too much. One night, as a stunt, he lit a chair on fire during his appearance. Not on Carson's watch, but during Jay Leno's era. Still, the network didn't laugh. Bobcat was banned, arrested, fined, and sentenced to do public safety PSAs. That one explosive gag torched his late-night career in seconds. And then there was Kathy Griffin. Bold, brash, unapologetic. Her humor hit hard, and she never held back. But that raw honesty didn't sit well with Carson, or Leno, for that matter. Her jokes crossed the invisible line too many times. Eventually, she found herself locked out of the late-night circuit altogether. No one said it out loud, but the message was clear. She didn't fit the mold of what The Tonight Show was supposed to be. One too many uncomfortable truths, and the doors stopped opening. Sometimes the bans felt personal. Other times, they were just a result of bad timing. Melanie Chartoff didn't do anything wrong. She was sharp, quick-witted, and her jokes landed with the crew and even Carson himself. She shared the stage with icons like George Burns and Richard Dawson in memorable episodes. But in Carson's world, even laughter had boundaries. And if you made the wrong person laugh at the wrong time, even you weren't safe. In the blink of an eye, a whisper could cost you a seat on the most powerful platform in late-night television. And let's not forget Howie Mandel, who came bearing nothing more dangerous than a giant stuffed tiger. Just a goofy bit, a harmless prop. But it wasn't cleared with the producers. It disrupted the flow. Carson hated surprises. After that, Howie was met not with confrontation, but with the deadliest response of all: absolute silence. No more invites, no more second chances. Lola Falana brought something even more daring: truth. During her appearance, she dared to speak about racism, about what it meant to be a black woman in an industry that wasn't ready to hear it. She didn't shout, she didn't blame, she simply spoke. And just like that, she was gone. No scandal, no headlines, just quiet, deliberate exclusion. In a world where image ruled all, the truth was often the most dangerous thing you could bring to set. Artie Lange's downfall was different. Messier, more personal. His battle with addiction made him a wild card. Conan O'Brien eventually had to pull the plug and ban him from the show. At the time, it crushed Artie. But years later, sober and reflective, he credited that moment for saving his life. Sometimes the door slamming shut is what forces you to build another one. And then came the moment that wasn't just about bans or blacklists. It was about honor. Wayne Newton and Carson had once shared the kind of showbiz respect you don't find often anymore. But when Newton outbid Carson for a stake in a Vegas hotel, things got complicated. To Newton, it was business. To Carson, it was war. Instead of confronting him, Johnny did what he always did. He turned it into comedy. Except it wasn't funny. The jokes turned mean, personal. He took swipes at Newton's looks, his masculinity, even his kindness. Until one day, Newton stormed into NBC. No security, no cameras. He marched straight backstage and faced Johnny head-on. What he said that day isn't recorded. But from that moment on, the jokes stopped. Because even in Hollywood, where everything's scripted, sometimes the rawest scenes happen off-stage. When Wayne Newton made it clear he'd had enough of being Johnny Carson's favorite punchline, the ripple effect was felt instantly. The laughter dried up, the jokes stopped cold, and so did their friendship. Carson didn't extend another invitation, not even as a passing guest. In Johnny's world, when the curtain fell, so did the relationship. It was the silent exit of a man who lived on applause but didn't know how to handle confrontation. That's where Carson's pattern begins to unfold. Because just like that studio stage he ruled, his real life was a carefully guarded fortress. But to understand the cracks, you have to start with the man who spent decades sealing them. Before the legend, Johnny Carson was a kid from Nebraska pulling rabbits out of hats. He wasn't born for the spotlight. He carved his way into it with sleight of hand and steely discipline. They called him the Great Carsoni back then, and though the cape was long gone by the time he made it to television, the illusionist never disappeared. One of his earliest magic tricks? Making his insecurities vanish behind a wall of charm. As he transitioned from radio to television, Carson didn't just climb the ladder, he redefined its top rung. By the time he took over The Tonight Show in 1962, America had already crowned him. Every night at 11:30, millions tuned in not just for a chuckle, but for comfort. It wasn't just entertainment, it was ritual. Carson had that uncanny ability to make viewers feel like they were part of something intimate, even as he remained emotionally distant. But behind that signature grin was a man constantly calculating, weighing, and, when necessary, withdrawing. And once you realize that, you start to see how much of Johnny's world was designed to keep people at a distance. It wasn't just the guests who misread the signal. His personal life was a revolving door of broken promises, misunderstood love, and fractured ties. 4 marriages, each one beginning with hope and ending with silence. His first, with Jody Wolcott, was formed in youth and collapsed under the weight of fame. By his own admission, fidelity wasn't something he could promise. His second, with Joanne Copeland, glittered under the Hollywood lights, but wilted in private. There were betrayals, on both sides, and the marriage, much like his humor, became laced with bitterness. And even when he laughed about his own divorces, calling them expensive magic tricks where everything disappeared but his cufflinks, there was a hollow echo behind the punchline. That darkness followed him into his third union with Joanna Holland, another high-profile romance with another public unraveling. But when Alexis Moss entered his life, something shifted. By the late 80s, Johnny wasn't looking for fireworks anymore. Their quiet marriage offered him something none of the others had: privacy without pressure. It seemed, from the outside, that he had finally found the exit ramp from emotional chaos. Yet, the one wound he could never close was the relationship with his son Rick. It was one of his deepest sorrows, haunting him far more than any failed marriage. Rick's struggles were widely known, but Carson rarely spoke of them publicly. And when Rick died in a tragic accident in 1991, something in Johnny dimmed permanently. The next time he showed his face on TV, the king of late night looked unmistakably mortal. The sparkle had faded. The man who once lit up every room had become a flickering shadow of himself. After his retirement in 1992, Johnny did something most stars couldn't bear. He vanished. No farewell tour, no endless cameos. His final years weren't marked by lavish public displays, but quiet reflections on a life that entertained millions while revealing almost nothing. He left no autobiography, no final word, just a reel of laughter and a trail of unanswered questions. Even in death, Johnny Carson kept his mystery intact. Emphysema eventually took him in 2005, but the world barely saw it coming. The king of late night exited exactly how he lived, on his own terms, with perfect timing and no rehearsal. Today, he's remembered not just for the punchlines or the iconic desk, but for the invisible line he drew between the spotlight and the soul behind it. Have you ever watched Johnny's shows and wondered who he really was when the cameras turned off? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss more stories just like this one. Click the next video on your screen and discover the legends who changed Hollywood forever.